This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Floods kill more than 260 people as heavy rains pound East Africa. WHO estimates up to 190,000 people could die of COVID-19 in Africa. And CGTN correspondents discuss their experience covering the pandemic. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers. Here are more stories making headlines this hour. In business, it's only a matter of time before it's the end of South African Airways as we know it. And in your sports news, South Africa stalwart Steyn and Tahir eye Proteas swan song at ICC T20 World Cup. Let's begin the hour in East Africa, where more than 260 people have been killed in the ongoing floods. Kenya is the worst hit with over 194 people killed. Weather experts are warning of more rains. CGTN's Nick Mudimba reports.
As the East Africa continues grappling with floods, meteorologists are warning of more rains, which could last until the end of May. Regionally, Kenya has lost the highest number of people, with 194 out of the 260 deaths being reported there.
The water levels have risen so much. We are now pushed out of the lake. We thank God we haven't lost any fish.
There is trouble. Water has spread all over. Many people have been displaced, houses destroyed. It's been a month now, and I've never witnessed such a phenomenon. Businesses are affected. Things have been worsened by coronavirus. No one's traveling from other parts of the country to buy from us.
Authorities says forceful relocation in the affected parts could be employed if locals fail to move to safer areas. Uganda follows with 65 deaths. Thousands are also displaced, mostly in western regions. Kasese town and Buhunga village are facing worsening situations. The overflowing of Lake Victoria has also seen many parts of Uganda suffer electricity blackouts. This follows the clogging of turbines by floating vegetation in one of the hydroelectric power plants situated along River Nile. In Rwanda, over 11,000 locals have been displaced. An unknown number of people have also been killed in landslides in the mountainous northwestern region. Somalia also continues facing deadly flash floods, which have displaced over 20,000 households. Roads, homes and other installations have also been washed away as water levels in the Shebele River rise to unprecedented levels. For the Horn of Africa nation, the situation started late last year, forcing the United Nations to issue a warning. Aid agencies are also warning of a food crisis should the torrential rains persist. Nick Mudimba, CGTN.
Well, let's not get the latest COVID-19 figures in Africa. There are now more than 55,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus and over 19,000 recoveries across the continent. The death toll currently stands at over 2,000. South Africa is the hardest hit on the continent with 8,232 COVID-19 cases. In Central Africa, DR Congo has recorded 34 new cases, bringing the total number of infections to 897. The country is still struggling to contain the Ebola virus that has taken a toll on the nation for 2 years now. Elsewhere in Eastern Africa, Kenya has confirmed 25 new cases. The country's new COVID-19 tally now stands at 607. Kenya's Health Cabinet Secretary has warned that people flouting recent restrictions could lead to more infections in the country. The World Health Organization says 83,000 to 190,000 people in Africa could die of COVID-19. The health body also projects that 29 million to 44 million people could get infected in the first year of the pandemic if containment measures fail. The organization said its research, which is based on prediction modeling, looks at 47 countries in the WHO African region with a total population of 1 billion. It said smaller African countries alongside Algeria, South Africa and Cameroon were at high risk if containment measures were not prioritized. Well, for more on this now, we are joined by Dr. Ahmed Alguel Oma, Deputy Director at Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Thank you so much for joining us, Doctor. Let's just take a look at the story and cover it a little bit more in depth. The World Health Organization projecting that between 83,000 and 190,000 people in Africa could die of COVID-19. What do you make of those numbers?
Thank you for having me. These numbers and others are based on modeling, and models by nature depend on what assumptions one makes. You feed in the data and it gives you numbers. At Africa CDC, we prefer to focus on what good we are able to do with the time that we have, and whatever models that we are producing within, we use that for planning. And sharing the numbers sometimes can be able to result in unnecessary panic. Therefore, we prefer to focus on what we can be able to do to ensure we don't reach those numbers.
Yes. So, Doctor, let's just speak about some of the measures that some countries, well, a lot of countries are taking measures, and they're taking them in different ways. In some places, they've got curfews, others are in complete lockdown. But these projections, have they taken into consideration those restrictions, or are they numbers that are being projected if nothing is done to prevent this virus spreading?
Most modeling will take into account social distancing measures that governments take, including lockdowns, curfews, and a closure of public places like schools and wherever people gather. So depending on how restrictive those measures are, then the model will give you different numbers. In Africa today, looking at the countries that have done lockdowns and taken other measures for social distancing, we know that it is working. And the social distancing measures have actually slowed down the rate of infection within those communities that have taken social distancing measures more seriously. It works, and that is why we are encouraging governments to ensure that social distancing is one of the key measures that they take in protecting members of the public and reducing the levels of infection.
Doctor, there have also been these assumptions that the only reason African countries are reporting low rates of infection is due to limited testing capacity. Do you agree with that assessment?
Countries are testing. And they are testing depending on the criteria that has been set for testing. The numbers that we are seeing, we are reasonably confident that they are based on what countries are doing in as far as testing is concerned. And the numbers that are being modeled are not exactly taking into consideration the level of testing that is going on at country level. At Africa CDC, we have launched the PACT initiative, which is a partnership for accelerated COVID-19 testing, where we intend to support countries in Africa to test 1 million Africans over the next 4 weeks and 10 million Africans over the next 24 weeks. This will give us a much better indication of what the level of transmission of COVID-19 is in Africa. And using that data that we will be getting from this initiative, we can be able to prepare even better for protecting Africa and reducing the level of transmission in the communities.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Ahmed Alguel Oma, Deputy Director at Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, joining us live there. Let's revisit our top story, where more than 260 people have been killed in the ongoing floods in Eastern Africa. Kenya is the worst hit, with over 194 people killed. Weather experts are warning of more rains. For more on this, we are now joined by CGTN's Michael Baleke in Kampala and CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello in Mogadishu. Thank you so much to you both for joining us. Michael, we're going to start with you. Uganda is among countries in the region that's been affected by floods. Give us an update of what's happening. And also, Michael, if you could comment on the report that had said that there were about 200 people that were trapped at a hospital. Could you please just speak to some of that?
Hello, Hannah. In the last 5 days, much of western Uganda has experienced heavy rains. And on Thursday, yesterday morning, Kasese district, this is bordering the DR Congo, one person actually died in flash floods that swept through villages. And a rapid assessment report by the Red Cross shows that more than 3,000 people actually are homeless now, and many crops have been destroyed. Of course, in the floods also, there's a big river called River Nyamwamba. This river actually was also, it burst its banks, and of course it went through a major referral hospital in the same area. And the patients, of course, no one died, but so many people in the hospital had to be evacuated and taken to a nearby school. So right now, as we speak, the district task force with the Ministry of Disaster and Preparedness are meeting to come up with a response plan for relief food, access to safe water and beddings. Back to you.
Thanks for that, Michael. We'll be coming back to you in a moment. Abdulaziz, let's come to you in Mogadishu. Floods have reportedly killed 16 people in Somalia. Tell us more of what you're seeing there, Abdulaziz.
Well, Hannah, it's the rainy season in Somalia, and it lasts from April to June. And as you have mentioned, the rains have been quite heavy compared to past and previous years. We have seen 16 people confirmed dead by data from the Somali government as well as the United Nations, and these deaths took place in riverine areas as well as in regions in Puntland and Galmudug. The heavy torrential rains that began 2 weeks ago caused massive devastation, especially in the town of Qardo, that is in Puntland region, where homes were submerged following heavy flooding in that area. It was quite unexpected because the weather forecast in Somalia did not predict such heavy rains to hit that region of the country. And also the water levels in two rivers, that is Shabelle and Juba, that is the only two perennial rivers in Somalia. Water levels have risen to unprecedented levels, as you have mentioned in that report. And also there was a ministerial delegation that visited the towns of Bardere and Hiran, as well as Qardo town in Puntland, to scale and to check on the status of the situation there, because Somalia has been suffering from floods and climate-related disasters back to back from 2017 until 2020. It's been the same cycle from food insecurity to drought to floods to cyclone, and the same scale has been being reported in most parts of the country. So it seems that the Somali government has not yet learned lessons from that incident. We're talking about 2,000 farms that have been submerged and more than 200,000 people displaced from their homes all across the country. So it's a big challenge for the Somali government, and the ministerial delegation right now is touring parts of the country to scale what the government is going to offer to the victims of the people who have been affected by floods. It has set aside several millions of dollars, including $1 million that has already been given to Puntland authorities to mitigate the crisis in Qardo.
Okay, Abdulaziz, I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but Michael, it's been predicted that the heavier than usual rains will continue throughout the month of May. Have there been any emergency measures taken by the government to mitigate the impact of the floods for the people there?
Hannah, the rains were actually predicted almost at the beginning of this year, and the government sent out early warning messages to people living in these flood-prone areas to move to higher ground, but also those who live along the slopes of the mountains, especially that is in eastern Uganda, that's on Mountain Elgon, that's bordering Kenya. These areas are prone to landslides, and many people have been advised to move to safer areas, but many, of course, have ignored this call and perhaps don't have where to go. Recently, the Lake Victoria has also burst its banks, flooding several islands and shores. The government has been forced to create temporary shelters and camps for these people. But this even comes, Hannah, with a bigger challenge of controlling movement, safe distancing and limiting gatherings as the country, of course, moves to control the spread of the coronavirus. The government has also, of course, to find food for the affected persons who had gardens to turn to, but now don't have these gardens anymore because they have been washed away, and now they are currently in a lockdown. So it presents with new challenges, especially at such a time when the government is trying to enforce COVID-19 measures.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Michael. Abdulaziz, very briefly, I've got about 10 seconds for you, Abdulaziz. In my last interview with you, you had mentioned several challenges facing Somalia, COVID-19, the issue of terrorists in the region. Now these floods that have been devastating for some, how are authorities managing it all, especially in terms, Abdulaziz, of which areas require the most urgent attention?
Well, Hannah, when we come to COVID-19, the country has more than 900 confirmed number of infections and 44 deaths, one of the highest in Eastern and the Horn of Africa region. So the cases of COVID-19 have been spread all across the country. There's no region that hasn't reported a rising number of infections, with Mogadishu being the epicenter of this conflict. And the United Nations, there's a new terminology that's being used in Somalia. It's called the triple threat. This is COVID-19, torrential rains and floods, as well as the locust menace. And on top of that, we have the security challenge posed by militant group Al-Shabaab. The government has been deploying rapid test kits and protective equipments to hospitals in most regions of the country. And there are some regions, including Lower Shabelle, where Al-Shabaab has blockaded towns there. But that region has not been affected by heavy floods. What we're talking about is the Gedo region towards the border with Kenya, as well as the Hiran and the Middle Shabelle regions, where flooding is threatening to affect government operations in containing COVID-19.
Thank you so much, Abdulaziz. It's always good speaking to both of you. Michael Baleke in Kampala for us, and CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello in Mogadishu. Well, the United Nations has announced that it is increasing its appeal to fight the coronavirus pandemic in vulnerable countries from $2 billion to $6.7 billion US. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says the money is needed to protect millions of people and help stop the virus from circling back around the globe. Since the original appeal on March the 25th, the United Nations said that $1 billion US had been raised to support efforts across 37 fragile countries to tackle COVID-19. The updated appeal, launched on Thursday, includes 9 additional vulnerable countries, namely Benin, Djibouti, Liberia, Mozambique, Pakistan, the Philippines, Sierra Leone, Togo, and Zimbabwe.
My message today is simple. We have made a good start. Now we must build on it. We need $6.7 billion US to protect millions of people and help stop the virus from circling back around the globe. Humanitarian aid is not just a moral imperative. It is a practical necessity to combat the virus. If COVID-19 wreaks havoc in the poorest places, we are all at risk. I urge your strong, continued support for this appeal.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. When we return, covering the COVID-19 pandemic, our CGT and correspondents share their experiences.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
It's always great to get back into rally car. And at the moment, to be quite honest, I'm rallying at a different level.
Obviously, Aslam himself is enthusiastic and dynamic. He knows what he wants.
I always wanted to be a pilot, right from a childhood. There have been many times, when I had to put in a lot of work to make it work. But also, it's a question of being at the right place at the right time.
Welcome back. Well, let's now turn our attention to our continuing series on the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on Africa. Our CGTN correspondents have been working hard to give us the latest updates from across the continent, but reporting on COVID-19 comes with its own unique set of challenges. Our reporters shared with us how their journey has been so far. CGTN's Robert Nagila is one of our correspondents who's been working hard to provide updates. He gave us a look at how he's had to adjust his reporting amid the pandemic.
COVID-19 has had a huge impact in how we as journalists approach our work. There are now technical and technological aspects to it, with physical and movement restrictions across much of the continent. Government and private sector offices are all shut, so you've got a lot more people working from home. So first, accessing subjects is a challenge, and when you do access them, there's certain things to consider. Number one, what format is that interview going to be carried out? Is it going to be via apps like Skype? And if you do have to physically go there, then there are safety issues that need to be addressed, because you need to protect not just yourself, but your crew and your subject as well. That's very, very important. When you go out to the field, safety is paramount. Do you have the correct safety gear? Is your equipment well protected, sanitized? Does your subject have a mask on? How do you interview your subject? You're probably going to use a microphone with a stick, for example. And when you're shooting out in the field, certain safety protocols have to come into play, because at times you're also shooting under some very difficult circumstances. For example, here in Kenya, we have a curfew, but you need to have your credentials to show security officials, just in case they approach you. You're constantly trying to work within a balance, risk versus reward. Normally at this particular time, there would be dozens of stories that we would be following out there. The AU summit is there. Several countries were due to hold their elections as well. So this is a really busy period for us as media. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, all that's been cancelled, and the global focus now is on the pandemic itself. It's clear that for much of the year, and probably well into next year, the pandemic is going to dominate the news cycles, and we will be on this bay for quite some time.
Well, locked out of his home country, Uganda, CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy narrates his ordeal away from home.
Far off in a foreign land with normalcy disrupted, I closely monitor reports coming out of my motherland, Uganda, where authorities declared a total lockdown over a month ago.
When it comes to health, it is better to be a coward and be on the side of caution.
This being a new virus, there is no immunity in the population, so the majority of the population are vulnerable.
My family is back in Kampala. With COVID-19 invading our space, I've had to make adjustments. The uncertain situation demands that I have to chat with my family more frequently. It's never long enough.
Dylan was unwell last night, and I had to rush him to hospital in the middle of the night, despite the presidential directive on curfew.
Some of those low moments in life, I guess, when I cannot be there to offer a hand. Being unable to visit, converse with, hug, or spend time with family seems, all because of the COVID-19 pandemic, leaves me with that empty feeling. Friends back home inquire about the status of the virus from me daily, hoping that I have some inside scoop on the latest from the front lines as a journalist.
Do you think the vaccine is actually coming? Do you think it's something that we should say, okay, we should all look out for? Do you think those efforts are being done?
How I wish I had the answers on my fingertips, but I don't. With my family and friends looking up to me to provide some measure of reassurance, honesty seems to provide the best comfort. I tell my family and friends not to panic, and that the best thing to do is to stay home, avoid high-risk family members and friends, and to call the authorities in case of severe symptoms. COVID-19 has taken us to some uncharted territory where distance is the norm. Life seems more like survival than living. Will humanity ever return to normalcy? Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, CGTN's business correspondent in South Africa, Sumitra Naidu, walked us through her daily juggle while working during this COVID-19 pandemic. Let's take a look.
Okay, name 3 countries on the map that have a border with the ocean.
A mother helping her son with his schoolwork. A normal household scene. Except these are anything but typical times. My 10-year-old son, Joshua, hasn't seen a classroom for more than 3 weeks. And every time I leave the house to tell the stories of a nation under lockdown, I'm placing my life and his at risk.
It's difficult, eh?
I've had to think long and hard about how to work safely. I could contract the virus from my movements, my interactions with people at any time. But it is important to me to continue my work.
Government has heard the pleas of the tobacco industry, but still believes that it's more important.
As a journalist, I have a responsibility to inform the public, tell stories and raise awareness.
I think there was 13.
It is tough, though, hearing the struggles of people, many that have lost their only income.
What are you doing now that you're unable to work?
Others that are going hungry, and hearing of those that have died. I doubt life will ever be the same. I am grateful that I am still able to work, do what I love, and contribute to society. Sumitra Naidu reporting for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Our Egypt correspondent Adel El-Marouchi narrates his experience while covering stories on COVID-19. Even as he did this, he remained confident he was safe from the virus until one situation reminded him of his vulnerability.
When Egypt began to report COVID-19 cases and imposed a night curfew, our work changed completely. Many guests would refuse to grant us interviews, and we too were worried to go to them. At first I thought that doing an interview in an open area would grant me some safety and reduce chances of infection. But as one interviewee spoke to me, droplets of saliva reached my face. I then realized that I needed to take much more measures to protect myself. Later on, when cases were reported at the National Cancer Institute in Cairo, we had to go inside to request for interviews with officials. Remember that many staff at that institute had tested positive for coronavirus. Covering the pandemic is not easy. It's sometimes risky. It's mostly about heartbreaking stories, but there was the bright side. Stories about how the youth would volunteer to spread awareness and distribute face masks and disinfectants for free were heartwarming. Then there was the story of how inventors were inspired to create disinfectant gates to increase public safety. And how a nation like Egypt, despite its budget deficits and struggling economy under the pandemic, would, regardless to that cost, send medical supplies to its friend states in different corners of the world. The deadly virus is putting an immense pressure on the world, but it has also shown the best in people and in nations. And no matter how hard the measures taken to curb the spread of the disease are, people always find a way to march on. Adel El-Marouchi, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, here is C.S. Duplessis' perspective on covering COVID-19 as a sports reporter for CGTN.
It's changed considerably. The only reason I'm standing here in this park is because I'm an essential service, and in South Africa, journalists are deemed an essential service. So from that point of view, we have the freedom of movement. And this lockdown has prevented us from using that freedom of movement where normally we're used to going to athletes or training sessions where content has been on our doorsteps. Now we have to be inventive, we have to source the content, and we have to rely heavily on technology to get the stories out. I think one thing's for sure is a lot of people will realize how fortunate they are to be in a position to be able to tell stories and bring news to people. And I'm particularly fortunate to be in that position, and something I've realized that I can't take for granted, because the COVID-19 pandemic has changed how the world interacts, how the world engages with other people. And I think this has taught me that you should never take for granted what you have, and that you should appreciate every single moment, because we tend to take sporting experiences in our stride without thinking what they actually mean to everyday people. And know that now that there's no live sport, you know, we realize that it's such a huge part of society, and being able to tell the sports stories and bring those stories to people is such an important part of people's daily lives. So it's taken this pandemic for me to realize how fortunate I am to be a part of the team at CGTN and being able to tell stories to the public. I think what I'm excited about is when the lockdown is eventually over and when we overcome this pandemic that's gripped the sports world. I think sport will be celebrated for what it's worth. I think a lot of people just sort of, they know sport is there, so their weekly, their football matches or their rugby games or their tournaments that they participate in and watch, people take that for granted to a certain extent. So now when we overcome this tragedy, this pandemic that has claimed so many lives, I think people are going to be aware that they're fortunate to have sport, to have the best athletes once again plying their trade. So from the ashes, if you can put it that way, there will be a huge celebration in sport, a huge uptake in the keenness and interest in sport once again. And an event like the Olympics in 2021 is just going to be absolutely incredible once we overcome this terrible time in the world. The most challenging aspect to doing your job in this current time is that the athletes are locked down, the administrators are locked down. A lot of the sports stories are coming via technology. So for a journalist in this environment, it's not just a case of going to a training session or a press conference where athletes and coaches are speaking. You have to interact with them. So the challenge has been to rely on your network, to rely on your contacts and rely on your relationships to bring the stories. So it has changed the way we go about putting out the stories, getting that content, but at the same time it's taught us to appreciate what we do even more.
Your business news is coming up after the short break. It's only a matter of time before it's the end of South African Airways as we know it. And the tourism industry in the UK braces for change beyond lockdown.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. You're watching News Making Headlines right here on Africa Live. Well, China and the U.S. say they will honor their Phase 1 trade agreement and will push to establish a positive environment for further cooperation. The comments were made during a phone call between China's Vice Premier and top trade negotiator Liu He and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. The Phase 1 deal was signed in January, covering issues including international property rights, technology transfer, and China's purchasing of U.S. goods. It was the first major breakthrough after a nearly 2-year trade conflict. In the next 48 hours, Public Enterprises Minister in South Africa, Pravin Gordhan, is set to meet the South African Airways Business Rescues team in an effort to iron out tensions between the group and the South African government. The government was at loggerheads with the airline, which wants all flights, including those to repatriate stranded South Africans, halted by Friday. SAA was put into business rescue earlier this year. Business rescue practitioners have recommended that it either be liquidated or wound down with all staff retrenched. But the government is intent on seeing a new airline rising from the ashes of SAA. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected countries differently, but there appears to be a common thread throughout, one that was a little unexpected, as CGTN's Angela Coppola now explains.
The pandemic has led to lockdowns and economies almost grinding to a halt in most countries. It's also led to increased innovation.
We expected there to be innovation and as a consequence, an increase in the development of intellectual property. And we have seen that. There's been a tremendous increase in development of intellectual property. And then we're also seeing a rapid adoption of technology in the retail space. So either current technology being embraced, for example, adoption of off-the-shelf mobile applications.
Retailers have moved quickly because their businesses have almost dried up overnight.
We're seeing retailers developing their own bespoke technology, which not only creates a revenue stream from the products that they're selling, but also a revenue stream from being able to license that technology to other retailers.
Ownership of the intellectual property that's been developed now becomes a grey area.
Now, as retailers start going back or they contemplate going back, they're going to have to look at what they've developed over the last 6 weeks. And not only the owner of the retail stores, but also their employees, because a lot of those employees have been on unpaid leave. So they need to look very carefully at the ownership of that intellectual property. Is it going to be the retailer that owns it, or do they need to look in a more detailed way as to which employees have developed intellectual property and ensuring that it's actually the retailer that owns that IP.
The challenge during the first phase of the lockdown was that the intellectual property offices were closed. They've since reopened.
They're going to have to try and register their intellectual property now that everything is open again, to make sure that they get registrations. And that is also incredibly important, not only from protecting their products, protecting their brands associated with those products, protecting the inventions related to those products, but also they can generate revenue by licensing that IP to other retailers. And then also what a lot of people forget is that if they register that IP, they can raise funds by putting that IP up as security.
As businesses start coming back on stream again, it's important that any agreements are actually signed in legal terms, because otherwise people are put at risk and others might take advantage. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Egyptian parliament has approved the government's request to increase revenue. The law includes an increase in some public services. It also imposes fees over fuel and other commodities. CGTN's Adel Armrouchi has more.
In a desperate move to manage its widening deficit, the Egyptian government wants to add fees on some commodities and services. It's adding a 10% tithe over professional sports contracts, 2% on concerts and wedding ceremonies, and 5% on mobile phone sales.
Our only reason for accepting the government request is the given circumstance of the coronavirus. There is a slowdown in global trade and economy. Egypt is affected. The government seeks to increase its resources, which will drop in the next fiscal year due to the drop in tax revenues and other resources.
Parliament has approved the government request, which adds up to 20 US cents per kilogram for tobacco. Some members of parliament, though, objected to fees imposed over fuel. The financial ministry wanted 20 cents for every liter of gasoline and 35 cents for diesel.
I saw there was a drop in oil prices globally, which also affected Egypt, so they shouldn't add any fees. But the government claims that consumer prices won't change because there are future drops in prices expected due to the current $22 crude price. The government's current budget has set the price for $67.
Parliament is still negotiating with the government to adjust its expected oil prices in its next fiscal year to range from $45 to $50. Expected revenues increase from fuel fees alone is around $400 million out of the $1 billion this Resources Development Law targets.
There's no need for increasing notary services because that affects average citizens directly. Other aspects like the 25% on imported pet food, that's fine. Some articles are acceptable, but others like fuel are not reasonable. What's more important is that the government supports underprivileged Egyptians in return.
The pandemic has made the Egyptian government try to allocate funds by all means. Each of the articles approved by the parliament might only provide it with fractions, but putting them together the government may somewhat bridge the gap in the budget deficit. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, the East African bloc is facing some challenges facilitating the transport of goods between member states and simultaneously preventing the spread of the coronavirus among long-distance truck drivers in the region. Guidelines issued by the regional bloc have required the testing of all truck drivers at special border points. While the move does help reduce mistrust among truck drivers and border officials, the delays and restrictions are causing some friction between member states. It has also increased the cost of transport between major cities. Stakeholders in the transport sector say they're seeing increases in fuel expenses, mileage per trip, and even truck and cargo security. Officials say their aim is to keep border crossings open for freight traffic so that trucks can be cleared as quickly as possible. They now plan to deploy mobile lab clinics at key border points to manage those delays. East African member states are interlinked at many levels, hence the need to come together and issue regional guidelines. The Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund has approved funding for various countries to respond to the economic shock caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Kenya will receive $739 million. Uganda will receive $481.5 million, while Zimbabwe will get a grant of $7 million. The funds were approved on Wednesday and are expected to help the various countries revive economic growth. The grant to Zimbabwe should help it fight the coronavirus and provide support to the already struggling economy and food crisis. Zimbabwe is not eligible for debt financing and forgiveness as it is still in arrears of $1.2 billion to the World Bank, African Development Bank, and the European Investment Bank. In the UK, the lockdown is still on, and with the marking of VE Day, many businesses could have cashed in on the influx of local and foreign tourists. Here is Asta Tal with more.
Streets in London remain eerily empty as businesses remain shut. The lobby at the London Bridge Hotel is no different. Given that it's Victory Day in Europe, or V-Day, this place would be abuzz with activities as guests from far and wide came to celebrate the day when Europe declared victory in the Second World War. But the coronavirus pandemic has halted this and many other activities. However, when the lockdown is lifted, all guests arriving in here should expect a new order.
We have a policy, obviously, that people, as soon as they walk through the doors, they will have an hygienic mat, a disinfectant mat where they're going to step into, where they're going to sort of cross over with their suitcases as well. They're going to have our staff handing over masks if they don't have one, handing over some disinfectant for their hands. And also we will be disinfecting every single piece of suitcase that comes through the doors.
The hotel is currently hosting hospital staff, and still caution dictates its mode of operation, and it is not easy.
I think it's the biggest task of all, to be honest with you, because understandably a bedroom like our own homes, it's one of those areas where the points of contacts are multiple. So what we tried to do initially was we tried to decrease the amount of points of contact that will allow for sort of transmission, and that is by decluttering the room as much as possible. That is the first step, even before the guest walks into the room.
There is hope that the restrictions will be lifted soon. But for businesses like London Bridge Hotel, the current lockdown is taking its toll.
So it is becoming critical. They are running out of cash. We are talking about weeks, not months, that they've got left to survive before we need to have an injection of further support from the government.
Many might be forced to scale down on their workforce.
Well, I think without that support package from the government for the remainder of this year to some extent, you will see 30 to 50,000 premises at risk of closure, and up to 2 million jobs in hospitality and the wider supply chain at risk.
Things are expected to get back to normal across the world after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, including here in London. But it's still not yet known when that will be, and the economic effects might linger on for a much longer time. Astatal, CGTN.
Time for us to take a short break and return. We speak to Nigeria's oldest parents as the couple gives birth to twins.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Well, some are calling it a miracle with a 68-year-old Nigerian woman who has set what is considered a medical record in Africa when she gave birth to twins. Margaret Adenunga delivered the babies through a cesarean section operation at the Lagos State University Teaching Hospital. She and her 77-year-old husband have been married for 46 years, but had no child until now. CGTN's Deji Badmus has been to see the new parents and now reports.
Unless you've heard their story, you'd probably mistake the babies for their grandchildren. But the twins are actually the children of Margaret and Noah Adenuga. And yes, 68-year-old Margaret gave birth to them. The couple had been married since 1974 and had been trying for a child without success until now.
What can I say? When he finally came, we are happy. I was overwhelmed, but we thank God. We give glory to God.
Carrying your own baby now, how does it feel? What's the experience like?
I'm very happy to see them. So I'm happy. I'm happy, always happy when I see them.
Their story is that of human perseverance in the face of a seemingly impossible situation. After 3 failed IVF attempts, the couple did not give up. The 4th attempt eventually led to the birth of the twins.
When we started, I keep assuring my wife that you have it, it will happen. It's going to cost money. I only ask my wife, because of her age, do you think you can still carry pregnancy at your age? Say, why not? Say, why not? If you are then, relax. It's not over until it is over.
I never lose hope any day. Anyway, I used to tell him that where we are living, I said before we leave that place, we are going to carry our baby. If our baby are going with us, it's not only one. They are going to be 2. I'm a church goer. So in the church, I used to see many testimonies that there's nothing God cannot do. So yes, I have faith on that. I stand on my faith that God will do it.
Apart from their own self-imposed pressure, the couple say they faced enormous pressure from their family and friends as well.
My mother, before she died, we are at loggerhead. Because she wanted me to marry another woman. I told her, you are not to tell me who to marry. Even my sister, they are telling me one day, what was a day, I'm free with them, because occasionally I'm free with them. I told them, but I say, please, auntie is old. I say, yes. Go and look for a younger person.
How were you able to deal with the pressure coming from his family?
He was the one giving me confidence that I shouldn't, when something happens like that, and the one you are, that your husband did not take their side, you'll have confidence on yourself.
Margaret almost lost the pregnancy. Doctors had to keep her in the hospital and monitor her in the last 3 months before she delivered the twins.
When you were told you were going to have a CS, were you scared?
I was not. Even they asked me to sign. I signed for it. So I was good. I know that nothing will happen.
What's your wish going forward for these children?
Sorry?
What's your wish and what's your dream for them?
I wish God will do whatever I want. I can do. God will provide. Whatever they want, God will provide.
God, the Almighty God that gave me these twins, will provide enough for me to take care of them. And will give me good health, long life, so that I can take care of them. I believe by the time I'm, say, 80-something, they will have grown up to see me, to know what I have for them. And by the power of Almighty God, they will never regret coming to me. So they know.
They went through a lot to realize their dream, and now they're living it. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
In the film industry, credit often goes to the actors, producers, directors, and scriptwriters for any job well done. But it appears prop masters are the unsung heroes in film production too. CGTN's Nick Mujimba caught up with Paul Kiua. He is a young, talented prop maker whose work has thrust him into the limelight.
The African film industry has endured challenges over the years. Lack of equipment has often compromised the quality of production. Modern, high-quality facilities for filmmaking cost an arm and a leg. Paul Elias Protisa, a film enthusiast, noticed that demand for affordable equipment. He used creativity to bridge that gap by making production equipment from his workshop at home. It has taken hard work, sacrifice, and resilience.
A lot of scenarios made me start this journey. I wanted a good life. Then I was a rapper and I needed something to challenge me for a better life. I saw that the only thing I can do is to get creative. I tried so many things until I settled on filmmaking equipment. And that's how I grew.
As a former rapper, Protisa realized he needed to do more. Things were tough in the local music and film industries.
When I used to rap, if you compared international videos with ours, our quality was really wanting. I saw that as a chance because number one, most of them were not available in the Kenyan market. I was the first person in Kenya to make a crane and took it to the markets. And since there was no other crane, that's how they gained popularity. Importing is unnecessarily expensive, maybe due to monopoly. When I made mine, they were cheaper and everyone was looking for me.
What he charges depends on his clients. It's all about bargaining.
My clients vary. Many of them are in the film, music and documentaries industries. Just all the crews that use a camera. Mostly a crane. If I have someone to operate it, I charge $150 to $120 a day. I also sell them at $100 to $200 depending on how we agree. And there are people I even give for free.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed his way of life, but he still can afford to put food on the table.
COVID-19 has brought its share of challenges, but I think it's not just about business. Life is not all about you missing a meal. Life is not all about you missing a good night's sleep. For me, I feel like life is you as a person minding the other person, even if you're going to bed hungry. I feel at the moment the world has a common enemy, and now we are working as a unit.
With so many inconsistencies in filmmaking in Africa, Protisa is one of the young people here in Nairobi, Kenya, who has been able to bring together so many artists who are actually embracing his work. His work is to make film production in the country affordable and, of course, of high quality. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
It's time now for your sport news. The ICC T20 Cricket World Cup in October looks set to be the final international tournament for several of South Africa's stalwarts. Stars like Dale Steyn and Imran Tahir, who have had a massive impact on the game globally, will bow out after stellar careers for the Proteas. CGTN's Duplessis takes a look and shares with us what made the pair so special.
Dale Steyn has been a thorn in the side of many international opponents since his debut in 2004. The